Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to ask you about the Basharian report that you issued on the Liberal Green Slush Fund SDTC. You, in the report, acknowledge that you were aware of the parliamentary hearings as well as the Auditor General's work in this area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then you were aware then that the Auditor General, as part of a report, identified 9 Order in Council appointments to the board who had voted conflict of interest, not just the one in Mr. Barrett's letter. And earlier you said that you only dealt with Order in Council appointments. Will you look at the other 8? Those 8 voted 186 times out of 400 times, 400 votes, 400 transactions, 186 conflicted, 44% in those 9 directors. That's not bad legal advice. That's a culture of conflict of interest.
Would you please repeat your question exactly? I want to make sure that I misunderstand you.
The Auditor General identified 9 Order in Council directors, 186 times voted conflict of interest. Out of 400 transactions, that's 44% Order in Council appointments, almost half of the money, $330 million. They voted companies they had a conflict of interest in. That's not bad legal advice as you suggested in your report, is it? That's a culture on the board of conflict of interest, of self-dealing. Would you look at all 9 directors in those instances of conflict of interest?
Let's get the facts straight. I was asked to look at 2 Order in Council appointments, and I looked at them and their activities.
Sorry, Commissioner, that was from Mr. Barrett's letter.
Yeah.
You have the ability to investigate beyond being asked, I would assume. And in that, Ms. Basharian also voted herself, and you didn't cover this, or the board gave her companies $10 million, $10.4 million actually, from companies she had an interest in: Hydrostar, Cascadia, Seaweed Corp, Margrove Lithium, and Resonant money. Those are outside of the COVID payments. Did you look at those?
Are you suggesting that she did not recuse herself? Are you suggesting that she voted?
I'm suggesting she created a culture of conflict of interest with 9 directors all voting themselves half of the money from the Green Slush Fund, and you haven't looked at it. I want to know why you're not looking at probably the largest scandal in terms of dollars in conflict of interest, not only in this government, but in decades.
Michael, why don't you?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here. The report makes clear that the Commissioner did examine every vote of every meeting in which Ms. Rashurin was the chair. So we didn't name specific companies that were the ultimate beneficiaries. The focus of the examination, in large part, was the involvement of accelerators in which Ms. Rashurin was associated, so the Rashurin Center and Mars Discovery District, who were nominating other companies for funding. So in that regard, we have a breakdown.
That's only one aspect. I'm sorry, but that's all. I have limited time. That's only one aspect, and I'm curious as to why you're not looking into the broader issue of the $400 million scandal. The Auditor General identified $330 million of conflicts. One director who sat on the board and time on the board had from Quebec named André-Lise Matteau has $97 million go to companies she has venture capital interests in. That's all been identified on the time. 9 directors in the Auditor General report, all Order in Council appointees. Why are you not investigating those conflicts?
You know, Order in Council appointees come in 2 varieties. You have reporting public office holders and you have public office holders. Public office holders are those who have to comply by the act, but they do not have to at the beginning of their appointment. They don't have to come to us show what they owe and then follow the rules.
That wasn't my question.
I hear you, but I'm trying to give you the context. You're pushing me a question, and you're doing it on the basis of facts that you think there has been a lot of misbehavior and you're not investigating. I'm looking at the people who have reporting public officers. While we were doing the investigation of Madame Michaud and Mr. Winnet, the Auditor General did her report. Her report came out long after we had finished investigating these.
So why aren't you investigating?
Mr. Perkins, I'm afraid that is the time. You, I'm sure, have another opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I'd just like to follow up briefly on Mr. Genos's last question. So in the mysterious Randy emails and documents and the request access you had, just so I'm clear, it's on the honor system, I think you said, so that he is not compelled legally under oath or anything to provide you with all the documents. It's just an honor system. Is that correct?
Forward. When the things first erupted, he wrote to me and said, I'll do anything I can to clear my name. What do you need? And I said, I need the following regarding September 8. And I basically, any kind of communications that you had on that day with Anderson. There was he gave me that, and now that September 6th and 7th are in, I say, well, this is totally new information. Would you please provide me everything that kind of communications you had on those 2 days with Mr. Anderson? The issues obviously being whether you had good dealings with him or whether your name was used in vain in order to enhance the position of Mr. Anderson.
So he was supposed to provide everything, he didn't, then you went back to him. So you have no way of knowing whether or not you actually have every document.
My capacity to investigate him is based on my being able to have reasonable grounds to believe. I had a mere fact that his name was mentioned in an email on September 8th, nothing else. Even Randy didn't even say Boisano. It's not enough to launch an investigation to constitute reasonable grounds to believe that something is wrong. Now we have 2 more days in which suddenly 7 times the name Randy is used. I want to know, first of all, from him, what were your communications, if any, on those 2 days? Once I have that, I will have to decide whether I have reasonable grounds to believe that an investigation is warranted.
Even though he was a 50% owner in the ultimate company that had very few employees. But
he's entitled to be an owner of a company. That's as long as he's a son.
Very few employees. There weren't many Randys there, unless you believe one of the Liberal MPs who may have said it was Randy. But I'll move on to SDTC. Part of your investigation was the Mars Accelerator Fund, which Ms. Visharian chairs Mars. Did you go further into that? Since Mars received, in the Auditor General's period, she audited 2017 to 2023, did you investigate the fact that Mars received almost $42 million from ISED? About a third of their funding comes from the federal government. Did you investigate at all the conflicts that she is in with regard to funding from Mars to her companies, NR Store and others, as part of that? Since federal government money isn't.
How does it constitute a conflict of interest that Mars receives funding from the government on a different program? She chairs
an organization that receives federal funding. She then has that organization vote money for companies she has ownership interest in. So you didn't look at that. The answer is yes or no, and you didn't look at that yet.
Michael?
Well, I just wanted to make sure, is the allegation that Mars directly receives funding from SDTC, or is that they facilitated the funding of other companies through their role as an accelerator?
look, I thought it was pretty clear they received money. She chairs it. That fund, which has federal government money, has given money to companies she owns. But since you haven't looked at it, I'll move on. I think what's needed is a little more investigation, in my mind, by the ethics commissioner into this whole scenario. Every time we do an investigation, there is more uncovered. So I'm going to move the following motion, which has been given to the chair for the clerk, if the clerk can circulate it. Given the Auditor General's audit of Sustainable Development and Technology Canada, and given that the government appointed board members approved $330 million towards 186 projects, that's 44%, in which 9 Order and Council board members had conflicts of interest in violation of the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act, and B, $58 million towards projects that were outside of SDTC's spending restrictions outlined in its contribution agreements with ISEC. But the committee, therefore, expresses extreme concern with the blatant disregard of taxpayer funds, calls on the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry to recoup these funds for Canadian taxpayers within 60 days following the adoption of this motion, and request that the Ethics Commissioner investigate all 186 conflict of interest votes and the culture of conflict of interest at the SDTC board.